Okay, so for creating materials, which are made up of textures, I've recovered my file here. And I have a ground plane with no texture on it, which is a brush or a geometry shape. And we'll see that textures are different on that, our materials are different. And then I have an asset that's been placed in here from a 3D program, that cube. Materials going on that are going to be controlled differently than they are on brushes. So we'll look at that. Now, what I was going to show you before was I usually create a folder. In this particular case, you can right-click and you can say new folder, and I created one called textures. I like to keep my textures and my materials separate from one another, just because it's easier to know that I have a material. A material can be made up of multiple textures, and that folder gets awfully big, and you can see you don't have a whole lot of room down here, which is where everything is going to go. So I tend to keep things separate, and I've already brought in the picture of the gravel and the picture of the gravel norm. So the way we normally get images, I'm going to go back, I'm going to get the other two. If I right click, I'm going to go to import into the folder game and then textures. Okay, and then I go and I hunt down on my computer where those things are that I want. Now the two that I want are the clay old diffuse and clay old norm, and they're both target files. Okay, and I'm going to click open for both of them. And it's going to process through, and it's going to pop up a couple of little windows. One's going to come up saying that it's been imported as a normal map, and this is this window right down here in the bottom right-hand corner. Hopefully you can see it. My picture is going to be down there. But it says text clay old normal was imported as a normal map, just to let you know that it has to be processed a little bit differently. They have their own compression method here inside of Unreal. It does not compress normal maps because it doesn't want to lose any of that data. So everything else has been slightly compressed, but the normals are brought in as a separate file. You used to have to manually do that. You have to select and bring them in individually and check a button that said that that was a normal map. But now it senses automatically what's a normal map, and it does it for you. So you've got that. Now, here's something else I wanted to show you, because I mentioned this in a much earlier video about saving your files. So these two files that I just brought in have the asterisk on them. That means they're not saved. The other two are saved. And I mentioned not typing in Control-S, which I'm going to do right now. Control-S for save. Oh, and it did it. Okay, you'll find that sometimes Control-S will save these things, and then sometimes it doesn't. So I really suggest you always get in the habit of going up to File and then selecting Save All. Now, it says Control-S, but don't fall for it. You can do a Control-S, and there are some things you can actually watch. The asterisks don't go away. So if you actually go up and select Save All, then it does it for you, and you're all set. All right, so I'm going to go get a couple of more pictures and bring them in here so I can finish this thing out and show them to you. I'm going to go back to Import. I'm going to go up a folder, and I'm going to go over to here, and I'm going to get those three pictures we looked at earlier. One is the window, one is the window targa, and then window emissive and window opacity. And again, they're all targa files. Now you'll notice these look like they're rectangular. Now remember I said in the last video, textures need to be a power of 2, and that most of the time they are square. Well, an image can be a power of 2 and not be square. For instance, 512 by 512 is a power of 2. It's square, it's 512 pixels by 512 pixels. 256 by 256 is also a power of 2. I can create a rectangular image that is 256 pixels high and 512 pixels wide. Or in this case, if I hold my mouse over it, it's 1024 wide by 512 high. Both of those numbers are powers of 2. So I can actually create, in some instances, rectangular images, and I can bring them in. But this is an exception and not the rule. Usually we just create square textures and we call it good. Just so you know. Let me bring those three images in. And I've got them in here, and you get a little representation. And it looks like, you see, for your preview down here, it actually will show you these things square, even though there are rectangular images. All right, so now we have the process of making a material. So I'm going to go up a level. I'm going to right click and create a new folder, and I'm going to call it materials. I'm going to open it up, and then I'm going to right click, and I am going to select material from the drop down right here. And it's going to create this, and it's going to look like here after a second, it's going to go ahead and create what looks like a ball here. Now, in terms of your naming conventions, and I've given you a sheet with naming conventions on it, you really need to get used to doing that. I name all of my materials what they are. So it is M, capital M, and then underscore, and then in the case of this one, it was gravel, is the first one that I'll do. So it's M underscore gravel. And that way I can keep track of everything that there is, and I know which images have to go back into that. Okay. Now, one of the things I did not show you, if I go back to textures, you can double click on one of these and it'll pop it up and it will show you. You can scroll in and out and kind of see what it is. It looks like it's see-through, but it's not. I can look at the different channels. I really don't want to see the background. Let's use solid color background. There we go. And so I've got this nice brick material going on right here. And let's just do the checker fill. Yeah, checkered. You can change those things and kind of do what you want to with it. I'll leave that checkered so it's black out there. It looks kind of see-through, but it won't be see-through when we're done with it. Okay, and it shows me all the specifics about that. Now, a word of caution on textures. It looks like I can go in here and change saturation. I can change vibrance. I can change the brightness. I can do Photoshop-like changes to that texture. Don't do it. If you need to change an image, do it in Photoshop. Don't try to do it in here. This is not what this is for. This is a last-ditch attempt if you really can't get back to a Photoshop file. But if you have Photoshop and you've done it in Photoshop, then if you need to make it darker, make it lighter, change the balances of the color, desaturate, which means make it go gray, or oversaturate, which means it really brightens up and makes the colors really vibrant, do it in Photoshop. Don't try to do it in here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take those two images and do that. Now, here's how we do that. I'm going to go back to my materials folder, and I'm going to double click on gravel. And this window is going to open up. And it's probably going to take me 2 videos to get through this one to explain all of the elements that are in here. But you can sort of see at a glance what is going on. I've got a window over here. This is my construction window. This is where I'm going to be doing all of the things that I need to do. It is all node-based. And we'll explain a little bit more about that when we actually start creating those things. I've got a preview window over here. I can show it lit, unlit. I can do perspective. I can show it on different objects. If I wanted to see it on a square, on a cube, I can see what the material looks like on a cube. I can put it back on that. I can zoom in and out. I can roll it around. I can kind of look at it. I can even hold down the L key on my keyboard and move the light around just by left-clicking and moving the mouse. Holding down the L on my keyboard, I can change the lighting in that window so I can see it. I've also got over here the particulars about this particular material. And we're going to go through these and we're going to explain what they are. There are a variety of different types of materials, and there is a whole lot of elements that go together over here. A lot of math. This is all going to be math-based. But we have cleverly hidden it all so you don't really have to worry too much about it, although there are some math terms like add and subtract and multiply and things like that. So you'll kind of see how these things go as we go through it. I'm just going to create a basic material here for you right now. So what I do for this is let's look at this node right here. Now, when I select that node, this details panel over here is what I have selected. If I deselect it, it stays right down here because I have nothing else in here. But let's say, for example, I go in and I decide I'm going to put in a multiply. Okay, and if I have a multiply selected, you can see things like that over here change. If I go back to my main material window, this stuff all comes back again. So I get that. If I've got something in here, I can pick it up, I can move it around, I can delete it, and I can kind of do whatever I would like to do. All right. So let's zoom in here and take a look at that. This is called mGraphel. That's the name of it. All right. I have a base color. This can be referred to either as diffuse or albedo. And I mentioned that before. I talked about the different types of materials that we have in here. It used to be called the diffuse slot that we put. That's always going to be the main image. If it's a color, it'll be a color that goes in there. If it's an image, it'll be the image that goes into there. Then we have a metallic slot and a specular slot. Now, specular means shiny highlights, which can be confused with metallic. But metallic has something going for it that specular doesn't really have. So specular will make an object shiny but not reflective, and metallic will make something reflective. Unreal added into this new version something called roughness, and roughness really screws things up because that will literally make something not look rough but look like a mirror. So it's really kind of weird. Then we have an emissive color. So if I wanted something to glow, which we're going to be creating a variety of materials here, I'm going to do one that's glowing. You're going to see that that one is where I'm going to do it. I have a slot for normal, and then I have a couple of other slots. I have a lot that are grayed out because of the type of material I'm doing. Ambient occlusion is my dirt map down here. Pixel depth offset is what allows me to set something so it looks like it's the texture gets fuzzy where it overlaps other objects, so you don't end up with a hard line. If I stuck a rock in the ground, I probably want it to look a little bit like, or stuck a rock in water, I want it to look like the rock kind of disappears into the water. So that's what that pixel depth offset will allow me to do, is it allows me to sort of make a transparency around the base of an object. So things don't look like they are solid objects stuck in other solid objects. It kind of blends the textures together, which, especially if you're doing landscaping, is a really nice effect. Rocks kind of blend into the ground. They don't just like all of a sudden the rock texture starts and a grass texture starts, or rock stops and grass starts. World position offset we'll look at when we start doing water. What this has to do with is that sometimes you create a giant texture that extends throughout your entire world, and then when you put an object into a scene, where it is determines what part of that texture you see. It's imagine that you have a giant water texture that covers your entire world, and you place a plane down and you want to pick it up and move it around, but you want to pick up, you want it to look like a snapshot of wherever you are in that particular giant material. And I'll explain that a little bit better when we actually start doing water, but you'll see how that works. Now these are based off of this over here, the material domain. Okay. I can do a surface, I can do a decal, which we'll talk about, I can do a light function, or a post process. I can also make my texture opaque, which means it's not see-through. I can make it translucent, I can make it additive, or I can make it modulate. Okay, and these things, if I'm making opacity or if I'm making self-illumination, these things are going to come into play. Additive, we've talked a little bit about colors, that if you take one object and place it, and it's see-through, and you place it over another object, the colors are magnified. Like they are when we're doing 2D particles in a 2D game engine. If I can take, one light that's a set to 1 and another light that's set to 1, if I overlap the two, I have the equivalent of a light set to 2. So that's kind of what additive is, and modulate does a little bit different from that. So depending upon what we have selected over here, that's going to determine the type of lighting, type of texture that we have. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to come back in just a second, and we'll assemble this into a video.